American people to offer solutions, to get serious about getting our economy back on track instead of just scoring political points that appeal to the base. I urge a no vote on this rule and the underlying bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentlelady from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to point out that I neglected to say earlier in response to my colleague who said we hadn't passed any House bills that those were bipartisan bills that passed. Every one of the jobs bills that we've passed has received bipartisan support, and the American people want us to be bipartisan. And I hope they have noticed in the debate today that the vitriol about this bill has not come from our side of the aisle. Mr. Speaker, House Republicans are committed to reducing government red tape as a way to encourage job creation. The rule before us today provides for consideration of yet another bill to reduce government interference in job creation by reinstating the traditional standards for union organizing elections and ensuring that employees' and employers' voices are heard. Therefore, I urge my colleagues to vote for this rule and the underlying bill. I yield back the balance of my time, and I move the previous question on the resolution.
Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it.
Speaker, I ask for the yeas and the nays.
Yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8, Rule 20, further proceedings on the question will be postponed. The Chair lays before the House following communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives, sir, pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on November 18, 2011 at 8:52 a.m. that the Senate passed with amendments H.R. 2056, that the Senate passed with an amendment H.R. 1059 and H.R. 3321, that the Senate passed Senate 99. With best wishes, I am, signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to take from the Speaker's table the bill H.R. 394 with Senate amendments thereto to the end that the House concur in Senate Amendment Number 1 and concur in Senate Amendment Number 2 with the amendment I have placed at the desk.
The clerk will report by title of the bill, the Senate amendments, and the proposed House amendment.
H.R. 394, an act to amend Title 28 United States Code to clarify the jurisdiction of the federal courts.
Mr. Speaker, without objection, I ask that the reading be dispensed with.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with. Is there an objection to the original request of the gentleman from Texas? Without objection, the request is agreed to and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to take from the Speaker's table S1637 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 1637, an act to clarify appeal time limits in civil actions to which United States officers or employees are parties.
Is there objection to consideration of the bill? Without objection, the bill is read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Section 2 of House Resolution 466, proceedings will now resume on the motion to suspend the rule and pass House Joint Resolution 2, which the clerk will report by title.
House Joint Resolution 2, joint resolution proposing a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution of the United States.
When proceedings were postponed on Thursday, November 17, 2011, 2 hours, 42½ minutes of debate remained on the motion. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Goodlatte, has 1 hour and 27½ minutes remaining. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, has 1 hour and 15 minutes remaining. Without objection, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, will control the time of the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Goodlatte, who yields time. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on House Joint Resolution 2 as amended currently under consideration.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself 2 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday we began debate on the balanced budget amendment, debate that I hope culminates today with a bipartisan two-thirds vote in its favor. The American people of all political stripes and from all walks of life demand we pass this amendment. Recent polling by CNN indicates that a constitutional amendment to require a balanced federal budget garners more than 70% support among men, women, whites, non-whites, every age group, every income level, and people from every region of the country. Why do Americans overwhelmingly support a balanced budget amendment? Because they understand that unending federal deficits wreck our economy and steal prosperity from future generations. President Obama has set the wrong kind of new record. The national debt has increased faster under his administration than under any other president in history. This runaway government spending paralyzes the job market, erodes confidence among America's employers, and has caused the worst economic recovery since the Great Depression. The balanced budget amendment is not an untested idea. 49 states have some form of a balanced budget requirement. We are overdue to adopt a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. We must stop the flood of deficit spending that threatens to drown future generations of Americans in a sea of debt. And I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentleman from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I be granted as much time as I may consume?
Gentleman is recognized.
I thank you. And I welcome the continuation of this discussion about an incredibly important proposal. We gather here today to determine whether we should add one more amendment to the 27 amendments to the Constitution that have been formed over since the last part of the 18th century when our country was formed. And I was reviewing something that a former chairman of our committee said in the 104th Congress, and I refer to the distinguished gentleman from Illinois, Henry Hyde, who said that, in effect, that he realized that the Republican Congress, when he was there, would not be able to balance the budget without using retiree funds in the Social Security Trust Fund. And I think I'm being assured in this debate that that will not happen in the present time. And here's what Henry Hyde said, and I quote. He said, "If you exclude receipts from the revenue that are received by the Social Security system from computing the total revenues of the government, if you take it out of the equation, then the cuts that are necessary to reach a balanced budget become draconian. They become 22 to 30%. And you know that we cannot and will not cut programs that we want to subsist and continue by 22 to 30%. You have to compute Social Security receipts in determining the income of this government so that the cuts you make to balance the budget are livable and not impossible." Henry Hyde was right then, and his statement is correct now. Under the proposal that we are discussing today, our nation's savings, the money taken out of every American's paycheck, could be looted, in effect, to pay for other things and to balance the budget, and it would take the trust out of the Social Security Trust Fund. The Ryan budget would cut Social Security's service delivery below current maintenance levels by more than $10 billion over 10 years, including a $400 million cut in 2012. This sort of drastic cutting will prove devastating to seniors as more aging boomers retire to rely on field office services, initial benefit claims, processing, disability determinations, and hearing decisions over the next 10 years. So I appeal to the kinder nature of my friends in the House. Please recognize that Henry Hyde was correct then and he is correct now. That we cannot achieve what this amendment proposes to do without going into Social Security receipts, and I think that that would be objectionable and unwise on the part of all of us here, and be unacceptable to the citizens of our country. And I would reserve my time, Mr. Speaker.
Time is reserved. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I'll yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Gibbs.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, as a member of the Balanced Budget Caucus, I rise in strong support of the Balanced Budget Amendment we're going to take up on the House floor today. I've heard from many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle this is not the time to take this up. But now is exactly what we should be taking up. In 1995, a Balanced Budget Amendment passed the House with bipartisan support, only to lose by 1 vote in the United States Senate. Then the national debt was $4.8 trillion. This week, the national debt hit $15 trillion. We have added $10 trillion to our debt in 16 years. That is $10 trillion in debt that threatens our job growth, our national security, and our sovereignty, and our nation's children. And that's $10 trillion in debt that could have been avoided had the Balanced Budget Amendment passed. We simply must stop spending money we don't have, and if we are going to get our economy a chance to grow and create jobs. Past attempts like Grand Road Haulings, the Balanced Budget Enforcement Act, and pay-as-you-go requirements have failed to bring about spending under control. America needs a permanent, long-term solution. We must hold Congress's feet to the fire and pass a constitutional amendment, Balanced Budget Amendment today. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Michigan.
Mr. Speaker, I would like unanimous consent to ask that Jerry Nadler of New York become the manager of this amendment from this point on.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment, while superficially appealing, is one of the most damaging things we could do to the Constitution of the United States. And yes, it is true, if you ask people, do they think we should have a balanced budget, they say yes. And if you ask people, do you think we should have an amendment requiring a balanced budget in the Constitution, they say yes. But if you ask them, do you think we should have an amendment requiring a balanced budget in the Constitution if it meant a cut in Social Security, they say no. If it meant a cut in Medicare, they say no. If it meant a cut in other essential services, they say no. And when you probe further, you find that this is a very damaging provision. Economists tell us, for a number of reasons, economists tell us that in a recession, you want to increase the government spending temporarily. You have to increase it because unemployment insurance payouts go up, food stamp payouts go up. And if you decrease the spending, it reduces the amount of products that people want in society, it reduces the amount of money in circulation, and it makes the recession into a depression. In good times, you should run a surplus. In a recession, you should run a deficit. Over a long period of time, the budget should be balanced. But if you attempt to balance the budget during a recession, you generate a much worse loss of jobs. And that's why you don't want this, or you shouldn't want this. Secondly, this amendment is not self-enforcing. All it says is outlays shall not exceed receipts, and Congress can pass appropriate legislation. But what does that mean? It means that if outlays exceed receipts, or if someone thinks that the estimates are wrong and outlays are going to exceed receipts, then you go to court. And then a court has to decide whether that's correct. The court has to decide whether the estimates are correct. And if the court decides the estimates are not correct, then the court has to say, all right, well, the court has a choice. It can say this is political, we're going to exercise judicial restraint, as the gentleman from Virginia said yesterday, in which case it won't enforce the amendment, and the amendment is meaningless. Or the court will say, okay, we'll order a tax increase, or we'll order an expenditure cut, in which case you have those judges making political decisions, which I don't think we want to see. Thirdly, a balanced budget amendment, starting where we are now, with a huge deficit that's been accumulated over a few years, means that you're going to have to make drastic cuts in Social Security and Medicare and veterans benefits. Now, some people say on the other side of the aisle, well, that won't be true because they don't count. But yes, they count. The amendment says outlays. Outlays are defined as all expenditures other than debts. Social Security is not a debt. The courts have held that. Medicare is not a debt. There's no contractual right, which means that if you're going to reduce outlays, Social Security is right in it. And if you're not going to reduce Social Security, you've got to reduce a lot of other things by much more. So this is a dagger pointed at the heart of Social Security and Medicare and veterans benefits. Now, we're told that the only way we can get our budget into balance is by this amendment. Well, the fact is that's not true. The reason we have the problem we have now is because of years of reckless Republican presidents and administrations. When President Clinton took office, we had a huge budget deficit, $300 billion a year. The forecasts were for $500 and $600 billion by the mid-90s. Within a few years, we had turned that around. Congress made decisions to turn that around, followed by the President's recommendations in 1993 and a smaller one in 1997. That one the Republicans helped with Speaker Gingrich. As a result of those decisions, by the time President Clinton left office and President Bush assumed office, we had a huge surplus. And the question was, what are we going to do when we've paid off the entire national debt by 2012? That was what was going to happen. What changed that? 2 huge tax cuts for rich people, pushed through by the Republicans and President Bush. And we said at the time that that would generate tremendous deficits. In fact, the reason they were set to expire in 2010 was because the CBO said that after 2010 they would generate tremendous ongoing huge deficits, which they are doing. Secondly, we had 2 unfunded wars, the first time in American history we didn't raise taxes to pay for wars. Thirdly, we doubled the Pentagon budget, not including the wars. And fourth, we had a recession starting in 2008 during the end of the Bush administration. And now some people say, well, it's the Obama administration, the unfettered spending of the Obama administration. Nonsense. The amount of money being spent on non-defense discretionary spending, that is all spending other than defense, veterans benefits, Medicare, Social Security, and interest on the debt, is the same today. The same, not a penny more, adjusted for inflation and population growth than it was in 2001. And in 2001, we had a huge surplus. Where did the surplus change to a deficit? Wars and tax cuts and increased Pentagon spending. Now, what can we do about this? So the problem is not spending alone. The problem is that we're not taxing the rich and the corporations enough. In 1970, corporations paid 30% of all federal income tax receipts from corporate income taxes. Today it's 8%. We've let the corporations get away with murder, the big businesses, with Exxon paying no taxes on profits of $6 billion, General Electric paying no taxes, getting a refund. That's our problem. But we don't want to deal with that. We want to pass a constitutional amendment. Now, if we pass this constitutional amendment, it would mean that any time you went into a recession, it would drive it into a depression. It would mean we'd have to make huge spending cuts now. It would mean we'd have to decimate Social Security, Medicare, veterans benefits. It makes no sense at all. We're told if this were in effect now, we would have to. We were told by the macroeconomic analysts that if this amendment went into effect for next year, it would increase unemployment by 15 million people. So I urge that we not pass this amendment. Instead, we do the hard work of increasing taxes on corporations and rich people, of getting discipline into our expenditures. But the first thing to do is jobs. If we got unemployment down to 5% where it was in 2007, that by itself would reduce unemployment by 40%. In a recession, first you take care of the jobs. When you're back into better times, then you can start thinking about balancing your budget, and that's when you ought to do it. Not force cuts in expenditures or increase in taxes during a recession, which just makes the recession much worse and the unemployment much worse, which is what this amendment would do. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I'll yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Paulson, who's a member of the Financial Services Committee.
Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the balanced budget amendment. Since our country was first founded, the issue of debt and government spending has been at the forefront of the minds of our political leaders, our national security advisors, our business owners, and citizens alike. It's obvious that our $15 trillion national debt, it's not a Republican problem, it's not a Democratic problem, it's an American problem. Mr. Speaker, our economy has stumbled. Families are making tough decisions and cutting spending and living within their means. However, one thing that hasn't changed is the way that government spends the people's money. We must work together now to resolve our spending-driven debt crisis, because the simple truth is that Washington must stop spending money that it does not have. Our debt crisis is a legitimate threat to our nation's security and our future. A nation that does not control its debt does not control its destiny. In order to give our children and grandchildren that secure future and economic stability, we need a balanced budget. We need this balanced budget amendment, because it is a fundamental reform that will absolutely produce results. It's time to pass a balanced budget amendment to give government spending under control, and I yield back.
Yields back his time. Gentleman from New York. Gentleman from New York.
I'll reserve for the moment.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I'll yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Buchanan, who is also a member of the Ways and Means Committee.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a historic opportunity. For the first time in 16 years, the House will vote on a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. Just this week, our national debt surpassed $15 trillion. For too long, Republicans and Democrats have turned a blind eye to our government's financial mess. Washington needs to make the tough choices necessary to balance the budget for the sake of our children and grandchildren. The federal government has balanced its budget only 5 times in the last 50 years. This is unacceptable. The first bill I introduced in Congress was the Constitutional Balanced Budget Amendment in 2007. It simply requires the federal government to live within its means. 49 out of 50 states, including my home state of Florida, have to balance their budget. Florida, the last 4 or 5 years, has had tough revenue years like everybody else, but they've balanced their budget. In fact, when we got downgraded by the S&P, that same week, Florida got upgraded by their credit rating. Admiral Mike Mullins, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, may put it the best when he said the biggest threat we have to our national security is our debt. And Erskine Bowles, co-chair of the President's Debt Commission, said the debt is like a cancer. It's going to destroy the country from within. That's right, and the time is right for Congress to ratify a balanced budget amendment and send it to the states. And I yield back.
Well, he yields back his time. Gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would simply point out that when S&P downgraded our debt, they were so well respected that the interest rates went down and the price of our bonds went up. So much for S&P. I now yield the gentleman from Wisconsin 2 minutes.
Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 2 minutes.
May I inquire, does the majority side have an extra minute that they could spare?
Gentleman from Texas controls his time.
Right.
Mr. Speaker, I'll yield the gentleman an extra minute.
Gentleman is recognized for an additional minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the balanced budget amendment. Mr. Speaker, I do believe that this Congress needs rules. It needs rules in budgeting. But I can't help believe today that the easier and more practical response to the huge budget deficits that we face is going back to a tried and true method called pay-as-you-go budgeting. Pay-as-you-go budgeting was a simple concept. You got revenue reduction, spending increase, you got to find an offset in the budget to pay for it. It was a rule that was in place in the 1990s that led to 4 years of budget surpluses. We're actually paying down the national debt rather than adding to it. Unfortunately, when President Bush took office, along with the Republican majority in Congress, they supported 2 wars that went unpaid for. They had 2 tax cuts that went unpaid for, that primarily benefited the most wealthy in this country. And you may recall that the main justification for those tax cuts was their fear that we were going to pay down the national debt too fast. It was laughable then, as it was laughable today. And then they supported the largest increase in entitlement spending since Medicare was created in 1965 with a new prescription drug bill that was not paid for. And these are ongoing obligations right now, adding to the fiscal woes that we're trying to climb out of as a nation. But I know that the majority today does not embrace pay-as-you-go budgeting, even though it worked in the 1990s, even though it helped create 27 million private sector jobs during that period and left an era of budget surpluses. So the next best thing we have to instill some fiscal discipline in this place is through a balanced budget amendment, going through that laborious process of trying to find 2/3 in the House and the Senate and then 3/4 of the states to embrace it. And if that's what it takes to get our fiscal house in order, to check against unbridled tax cuts that aren't paid for or new increase in spending that goes unpaid for, then it's a risk worth taking, because we are jeopardizing the future of our nation, our children's future, with these ongoing budget deficits, and steps need to be taken right now. There is a legitimate concern that members on my side of the aisle have been expressing, the 3/5 increase, a vote in order to increase the debt ceiling. We saw how perilously close we came to defaulting on our nation's obligations over the summer. And I fear that through this amendment, that a minority in this body could literally hold the rest of our nation hostage or paralyze the functioning of our government or lead to the default of our obligation. I still think that's a legitimate concern that's not addressed through this amendment. In fact, it makes that probability more likely, and it's something that we're going to have to address as we move forward. But today, I think given the lack of options that we face and the dire situation that we have with the budget deficits and the lack of progress, unfortunately, with the super committee, as we've seen over the last couple of months, that the balanced budget amendment seems like the most practical approach given the political realities. I encourage my colleagues to support it. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I'll yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Fieldingshausen, who is a member of the Appropriations Committee.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong support of the Bipartisan Balanced Budget Act of 2011 and urge its adoption. My colleagues, government at all levels is mired in debt. Mismanagement and overspending have left our nation on the brink of bankruptcy. Why? The math is simple. The federal government takes in approximately $2.2 trillion every year, but spends over $3.5 trillion. To sustain the operations of government, we borrow 42 cents of every federal dollar we spend. The implications are obvious. We're hurtling down a path towards the most predictable financial disaster in the history of our planet. Enough is enough. The American people want us to begin to live within our means. They need a permanent fiscal solution. Spending cuts are important, but what Congress passes today, another Congress, and even the same Congress, can undo tomorrow. The only effective way to control spending is through an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Balancing budgets is not an untested idea. Over 49 states currently abide by some sort of balanced budget amendment. Let's pass a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution today. Let's get the job done. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Doggett.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, while this House does sometimes act in ways that border on the insane, applying this constitutional straitjacket is hardly the appropriate treatment. It basically imposes the tyranny of the minority. 1/5 of the members of this House can block action. And America has seen how well that works across the Capitol in the United States Senate, where a 3/5 rule already applies and too often has rendered the Senate largely impotent, unresponsive to public demand for action on key national issues, unable to overcome the threat of a Republican filibuster. Today's proposal would broaden that impotence to both sides of the Capitol on a critical budget question. If we take a vote in this House and 260 people vote in the majority and 175 vote in the minority rules. Democracy loses. Of course, there is a major exception to this proposed new rule, and it is an exception that may well eat the entire rule. So long as a majority of the House determines, probably through the fine print of some huge, voluminous piece of legislation, that the country faces an imminent and serious threat to its national security, well, in that case, this purported constitutional amendment is totally nullified. What year since 9/11 would a majority of this Congress have been unwilling to make such a finding and render the proposal meaningless? A constitutional amendment is not a path to a balanced budget. It is only an excuse for members of this body failing to cast votes to achieve one. Can you give me another minute?
Gentleman is granted another minute.
Gentleman is recognized for one additional minute.
I voted for a balanced budget. I voted for a balanced budget when I voted against launching an unnecessary war on borrowed money. I voted for a balanced budget when I voted to reject the distorted Republican theology that when the question is taxes, less always means more. It's political alchemy. It's like turning hay into gold. The more the tax cut theology is proven wrong over and over again, the more the Republican faithful demands another tax cut to drive us deeper into debt. This is the kind of extremism that causes a stage full of Republican presidential hopefuls to declare that they would reject any budget agreement that cut spending by $10 if it raised taxes by even $1. A few months ago, such irresponsibility took us to the brink of default and jeopardized our economic recovery. They just could not overcome their ideological restraints. Don't jeopardize our economic future. Don't play games with veterans and retirement security and law enforcement just because Republicans cannot accept the economic reality as they often cannot accept basic science. Reject this misbegotten amendment.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I'll yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Denham, who is a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the balanced budget amendment. Just this week, the national debt exceeded $15 trillion. That's the bottom line, $15 trillion. And a balanced budget amendment would hold government accountable. Now, some say that accountability will tie the hands of Congress in yet one more way. Some say that this is going to create a greater debate between revenues and spending cuts. Well, I'd agree on both. The same way that every American family has to balance their budget every week, every month, every year, the same way that I, as a small business owner, have to pay my bills every week, every month, every year. We owe this country the opportunity to not only see a balanced budget, but a bipartisan effort here in Congress. If you want more job creation, we have to have certainty. Before a company is going to go out there and hire new employees, they need certainty not only to see that our country is on the right path, not only to see that we're actually going to reduce our debt, but also taking a look at our credit rating to make sure that we actually are credit worthy and have a long-term plan. That type of certainty will create jobs in this country. That type of certainty is what's needed with a balanced budget amendment. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd point out that families are able to borrow to pay for the car and to pay for the mortgage. Under this amendment, the federal government would never be able to borrow. It's quite different. Mr. Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Iowa.
Gentleman from Iowa is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.J.Res 2, an amendment to the Constitution of the United States requiring the Congress pass a balanced budget is something I've long supported and will continue to support. I'll try to tell you why. I great respect, and I hear Mr. Conyers and my friend Mr. Nadler. I understand their strong feelings, and I concur with many of them. I'd like to thank the gentleman from Virginia, my good friend Mr. Goodlatte, for his efforts to bring this bipartisan resolution to the floor. I also want to thank him for resisting the efforts of some in his party to enshrine the disastrous fiscal policies of the Tea Party into our Constitution. My colleagues, our budget is broken. After years of special interest handouts on both the revenue and spending ledgers, we now have a system that requires us to borrow over $1 trillion just to meet our basic obligations. Why? Why do we borrow? Has anybody in this body ever really asked this question? It seems we borrow because there is not the political will in this body to make the difficult decisions in our country that we need to do. We are elected leaders. We are elected to lead. But when it comes to the long-term fiscal imbalance our nation faces, many in this body seem to be more interested in securing the next election than securing the safety and soundness of our fiscal future. And no one party is at fault. Both parties are responsible for the financial mess we are facing. Our national debt did not reach its current level overnight, although we seem to have amnesia of what happened in September of '08 when Secretary Paulson came to talk to us about the sky was falling. But the problem has been decades in the making, with the current economic climate making the issue that much more visible. These are serious times, and serious times call for serious people to make serious decisions. And we know what these decisions must be. We cannot cut our way out of this mess, and we cannot and should not tax our way out of this mess. We need quite simply a balanced approach that gets us to a balanced budget. If I could tell you a situation in my home state. When I was Appropriations Chair, we were faced with a budget that was breaking the Constitution. Could I have another few?
The gentleman has yielded another 30 seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for an additional 30 seconds.
We decided to take it on. We were breaking our Constitution of the state, and we took it on. And we worked with downtown, we worked with everybody across the state, and we came up with a solution. And it's working. There's money in the bank in Iowa. The unemployment rate is around 6%, and that's something we need to be striving to achieve here. We can do it. What we have left out in this that we need to consider as we go through the steps is how do we include the revenue side of it too. We had a revenue piece, but it's working, and it'll work here. We can do this. Let's work together. I urge an aye vote and yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Costa.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the bipartisan balanced budget amendment. And I want to thank my colleagues, Congressman Goodlatte and others who have worked on this effort, and really urge my colleagues that this is the time that we need to come together to act on behalf of the better interests of our nation. Clearly, a majority of the citizens I represent in the San Joaquin Valley agree that Washington needs to get its fiscal house in order. We all want a balanced budget, but too few are willing to make an agreement that will move us toward that goal. That's why the passage of the constitutional amendment requiring the federal government to live within its means is an important step, but it is only a step. To balance our budget, members of both parties still have to come together to set priorities and, yes, make compromises and shared sacrifices to produce fair, balanced budgets each year. And never has the need been ever so clear. Our national debt recently surpassed the GDP for the first time since World War II. Each American share of the debt is now greater than their average salary. Congress could have acted sooner, but we haven't, and we can no longer afford to wait. The bipartisan passage of this balanced budget amendment is an important and necessary step toward a sound fiscal future. And as a co-sponsor, we should pass this measure. But we also should reach a larger agreement with the supercommittee that's fair and balanced on entitlement reform and revenues. If we do so, we will begin to restore the confidence by the American public that we can work together to get our economy back on track and create the jobs that all Americans want. I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, it's now my privilege to yield to a member of the Ways and Means Committee, the gentleman from Massachusetts, 4 minutes.
Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, earlier this week, Bruce Bartlett, a former Reagan advisor who recently testified before the Ways and Means Committee, commented about the Republicans' balanced budget amendment. He stated, quote, "The proposal that Republican leaders plan to bring up is, frankly, nuts. The truth is that Republicans don't care one whit about actually balancing the budget. They prefer to delude voters with the pie-in-the-sky promises that amending the Constitution will painlessly solve our budget problems." Mr. Speaker, the mystical date here is January 19th, 2001. Bill Clinton says goodbye, and
leaves a surplus, not subject, by the way, to opinion today, but subject to fact, of $5.7 trillion. $5.7 trillion. So the decision is made to cut taxes in 2001 by $1 trillion. The decision is made in 2003 to cut taxes by $1.3 trillion. And then subsequently to engage a war in Iraq based upon the faulty premise of weapons of mass destruction. Now, our Republican friends often come to the microphone and say things like, well, we all spent too much money. No, I didn't spend too much money. I voted against the war in Iraq. I voted against the Bush tax cuts. I voted against their prescription benefit proposal. Our friend from New Jersey a moment ago said the math is clear. But for Republicans, why is the math only clear when Bill Clinton's president and Barack Obama is president? They ran these deficits through the roof. There is no escaping that conclusion. The budget has been balanced 5 times since the end of World War II, 4 of those times during the Clinton presidency. 22 million jobs were created during those years. This is the equivalent of using a Luger to clean the wax out of our ears. This proposal is beyond the pale. They ran across the country for the last 2 years with the Tea Party type saying, have you read the bill? Yes, we've read the bill, and we've come to the conclusion this is a reckless pursuit of defying our constitutional responsibility when we've already demonstrated that we can accomplish these ends without disturbing the Constitution that they attempted during the campaign cycle to marry. Let's honor the Constitution, the Tea Party said. And today, what do they propose? Disturbing the Constitution after their financial malfeasance for 8 years. This argument they bring to the floor today is a political gimmick. George Bush Sr. lobbied me on the amendment many years ago when it failed. And respectfully, I pointed out to him that it was nothing more than political theater. When President Bush Jr. invited me to the White House to discuss his tax cut proposal in 2001, a matter of days after his assumption of the presidency, he said, this is the people's money. And he's right. And guess what? It's the people's responsibility to honor those veterans' hospitals after 35,000 men and women who have served us honorably in Iraq and Afghanistan, who are going to need our care for decades to come. It's the people's responsibility on Social Security, the greatest anti-poverty program in history. It's the people's responsibility on Medicare, which has added years to life and life to years. This proposal today overdoes it. There are enough men and women of goodwill in this institution to assemble for the purpose of getting onto a balanced budget without taking this pursuit of dishonoring our Constitution when we should be doing this on our own right now as the law has prescribed.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I'll yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. DeFazio, who is a member of the Transportation Committee.
Gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank the gentleman, and I particularly want to thank Mr. Goodlatte for his extraordinary leadership on this issue. We both supported a virtually identical amendment in 1995. Now, when I first came to Congress, I did not support a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. I said things similar to my good friend and colleague, Mr. Neal from Massachusetts. It's a gimmick. We don't need it. People will come together. We can make these decisions. It didn't take me long in observing the Congress to realize that there's an infinite capacity in this Congress to kick the can down the road. And the problem is that can's getting pretty darn heavy to kick down the road, and it's going to land on the next generation with full force. $15 trillion of debt. For the first time since World War II, our debt, this year, our deficit exceeds the gross domestic product. Now, we're going to have to force people to make tough decisions. That's the conclusion I came to when I changed and I supported the amendment back in the mid-90s. Now, just think about it. Pass the House, failed by one vote in the Senate. And had that become the law of the land, today would be paying down the last of the debt. We might still be in this hole economically that we're in, but you know, we would actually then perhaps have the capacity and the will to go out and borrow a couple of $100 billion to rebuild the nation's crumbling infrastructure. We could afford it. But in this environment, with this amount of debt, that's a very tough sell around here. This is an honest balanced budget amendment. It does not prejudice the debate between taxes, and there are many on that side who object to any new taxes or revenue, and spending cuts, and there are many on my side who object to many spending cuts. It does not discriminate. It's fair. It's even-handed. There were many on the Republican side who preferred one that would have tied the hands of Congress, said, no, you need a 66% vote to have taxes. No, you have to be limited to 18% of GDP. But no, they brought forward something that is fair, and it would be something that would force members of Congress and future members of Congress to make the tough decisions that we have to make. A lot of talk about Social Security. I'm an expert on Social Security. Social Security is the largest creditor of the United States of America, $2.66 trillion. We have to have the capability to redeem that debt to pay future Social Security benefits in the not-distant future when we have to draw on what's called a trust fund. It's not a trust fund. It's government bonds. It's debt. And if we keep adding to the pile of debt, will we have the capability to repay those Social Security bonds? And there's a long-term problem with Social Security. I have a bill to fix that, lift the cap on wages. I didn't notice that many on my side have been down here carrying on about the attack on Social Security in this bill. They're not on my bill, because that's a tough thing to say. We're going to make people over 250 pay the same amount of tax as people who earn less than 250. That's a solution long-term, but short-term, we've got to worry about being able to redeem those bonds and pay promised benefits to Social Security. And then a lot of talk about the debt limit. Well, when we're in balance, you're going to have a 60% vote to deficit spend, and you would need a 60% vote for an increase in the debt limit. I would say that they could be done at exactly the same time. It requires the same number of votes. Is someone going to vote today to say we're in balance, to vote in deficit to deal with the economic situation today, perhaps to fund infrastructure investment, and then vote later on today against raising the debt limit by that same amount? That would just vitiate their earlier vote. So I don't think that that's a real threat. If you vote no, you're assuming that we have an infinite capacity, infinite, to borrow money, to pass on to future generations, and still meet our obligations to the American people. I don't believe that. We need limits. We need to be forced to make tough decisions, and this would force future Congresses to make those tough decisions.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would point out that if this amendment passed, we would never be able to borrow money to do the infrastructure that we need. I now yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I suspect we're about to enter into a West Coast debate here. My good friend from Oregon brings a perspective a little north of California, and I'd like to bring to this discussion a perspective of California. For more than 30 years, California has lived under a constitutional amendment much like this constitutional amendment, a constitutional amendment that in the state of California requires a supermajority vote for raising taxes and for the budget itself. Very similar to what is required here. The only difference is in California it was 2/3, here it's 60%. One only need look at the extraordinary dysfunction that California has endured in the intervening 30 years since that constitutional amendment went into effect. It has become a situation in California where we went from the very best, the very, very best education system in this nation, both K through 12 and higher education, the best infrastructure in this nation, and the most robust economy in the nation, to one in which we've had perpetual political gridlock because of the supermajority requirement. So I bring to this House my own 35 years of experience with a Constitution that would that does impose a supermajority. It simply has not worked to the benefit of the state of California. To visit such a thing upon the United States, in my view, in my experience of 35 years in public life in California, would be a great disaster for the United States, one in which we would have perpetual gridlock. Already, in this House, this year, my Republican colleagues are very upset about the United States Senate not being able to do anything because of the 60-vote requirement. You keep talking about the 19 job bills that are over there that are tied up. It's the 60-vote requirement that has tied them up in the Senate. Last year, it was the Democrats that were complaining about the Senate not being able to move because of the 60-vote requirement in the Senate. Do we want that also here in the House? I would hope not. I would ask us to back away from what is politically expedient. And the political expediency, we all understand this. We've all been in this a long time. We understand the political expedience about the soundbite, about the way in which it appears we are taking action to solve the deficit. Please look at California. Look at what's happened in California over the last 35 years. As a supermajority vote has created gridlock. And by the way, I ask for another 30 seconds.
Gentleman is yielded another 30 seconds.
Gentleman is recognized for an additional 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would also ask you to take a look at the fact that even with that supermajority vote, California has perpetually run a deficit because it could not bring into balance the revenues and the outlays, because the outlays were required by the reality of the economy, by the reality of the people. This is a very, very important vote, and I bring to this House my experience of what a supermajority vote has meant to the state of California. Mr. Speaker, thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I'll yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Louisiana, Dr. Fleming, who is a member of the Armed Services Committee.
Gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, I've listened carefully to the debate today and listening to the other side. Mr. Speaker, this body is hopelessly addicted to excessive spending and budget deficits. Hopelessly. And the other side, those who argue that we should not have a balanced budget amendment are hopelessly in denial, just like a drug addict is in denial about their addiction. We have 535 members, if you include the Senate, that compete with one another to see how much money we can spend. And we have an executive branch that does the same. Republican or Democrat, doesn't matter. We all do the same thing. There's absolutely no control or governor, if you will, on our excessive spending. And let's put this in perspective. In the 235 years since the founding of this great country, we have added $10.6 trillion to the national debt. In 2.5 years of this presidency, we have increased that by 50%, an addition of $5 trillion. We just passed the $15 trillion debt level. Mr. Speaker, at the current rate, and this is not just a projection, this is set in stone, by the end of the first term of this president, President Obama, we will have increased the national debt by 70% just in that one term, 4 years. Mr. Speaker, we cannot do this based on our willingness to balance the budget. We're incapable of doing that. We're addicted to spending. We're in denial about this, and it's time that we do something. I stand in support of H.J.Res 2, a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution of the United States. Frankly, I would like to see a more restrictive form, a more severe form that controlled the possibility of added taxes. But I will vote for this. And just in closing, I would like to say that it does some wonderful things. It prohibits a debt increase without 3/4 vote. It requires the President to submit a balanced budget amendment each year.
Gentleman is recognized for an additional 30 seconds.
Again, it requires that the President to submit a balanced budget. Our Senate over there is yet to pass a budget resolution in 3 years. And it provides for a waiver in time of war.
Point of order.
I don't know if I can be against the balanced budget amendment without being compared to being a drug addict. Is that doable in this body to maintain some comedy? I believe in helping my constituents, but my support of spending isn't tied to a drug addiction.
The gentleman is not stating a point of order.
It's not a point of order that the gentleman has made reference to those of us who are opposed to the balanced budget amendment as having been addicted to drugs. Is that a problem for the comity of this chamber, Mr. Speaker?
Is the gentleman demanding that the words be taken down?
I'm not prepared to go that far. I'd like to hear the gentleman's explanation.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for regular order.
I'm not prepared to go that far,
Mr. Speaker, this is ridiculous.
The gentleman needs to be very careful because the gentleman's on the... I can actually have them read that back to you again.
The gentleman will suspend. Gentleman will suspend.
I'd be happy to suspend, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman has simply made a comparison.
Yeah.
So, again, does the gentleman wish that the words be taken down?
I'll withdraw my point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order is withdrawn. Gentleman from Louisiana.
Yes, just in conclusion, let me say that when I talk about us being, or we being addicted to spending, I'm talking about everyone in Congress and the executive branch. I'm not pointing fingers at any one group of people, but I will say those who are unwilling to do something about it by supporting a balanced budget amendment are in a clear state of denial. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from New York.
Speaker, I yield myself 90 seconds.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, it is not true, as we have heard on this floor repeatedly today, that both parties are addicted to spending and that the deficit is equally the fault of both parties. It is the fault of George Bush, the fault of the Republican Congress. Under President Clinton, a Democratic Congress voted for tax increases and for spending cuts and produced balanced budgets for 4 years in a row of such a significance that we were going to eliminate the entire national debt by 2012. The Republicans came in and voted without Democratic support and voted for huge tax cuts, for 2 unfunded wars, and to double the Pentagon budget without increasing taxes to pay for it, and that generated the huge deficit we have. The deficit was also generated by the fact that we got into, because arguably Republican deregulatory policies, we got into this huge depression caused by Wall Street, and that increased the deficit. The CBO, in January of 2009, before President Obama took office, 1 month before, said the next year's deficit would be $1.2 trillion without this president having done a thing. And the point is, spending, as I said before, spending on non-defense discretionary spending, everything other than Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and veterans benefits and interest on the debt has not increased since 2001 when adjusted for inflation and population growth. So that is not the source of our budget deficit. The source of our budget deficit is we cut the taxes on the rich and the corporations, and we spent money on wars we didn't pay for. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman. Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Goodlatte.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you. In response to the gentleman from New York, I just want to point out a few facts. First of all, in the last 50 years, the budget has been balanced 6 times. Democrats have controlled the House of Representatives 37 of those years, and in only 2 of those years, did they balance the budget. 4 times when Republicans were in the majority, the budget was balanced: 1998, 1999, 2000, and 2001. When those budgets were offered in this House, many Democrats voted in a bipartisan fashion for at least one of those budgets. The gentleman from New York voted against all 4 balanced budgets that occurred in the last time that he has been in the Congress, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from New York.
Speaker, I now yield 3 minutes to the gentlelady from Texas.
Gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
For fear of offending the training that my mother gave me, I will again say that I stand here unaddicted and recognize that there are those who are addicted to throwing the vulnerable on the trash heap of life. Time and time again in those budgets that I assume my good friend Mr. Nadler voted against, is that he refused to throw the vulnerable on the trash heap of life. We come again to a time when we want to abdicate our responsibility under the Constitution. But, my friends, I want to remind you that time and time again, the Republicans came back to that tired old formula, balanced budget amendment, and time again, they were rejected. This Constitution is sacred. It has nothing in it about the balanced budget. 26 amendments, and they have been rejected. Why? Because they don't want to do the job that the people of the United States has sent us to do, the job that says give and take on how we fund this government. Someone wants to talk about state governments. Yes, 49 states have a balanced budget amendment, but it is on the operation budget, not on the capital budget. The United States of America is responsible for disasters when they attack New York and Missouri and Texas. The United States is responsible for lifting a military and providing for our sons and daughters on the front lines of Iraq and Afghanistan, World War I and II, Korea, and of course Vietnam, the Persian Gulf, and many other places. Our states are not responsible for that. Balanced budget amendment, maybe we want to be able to follow the good works of our dear friends on the Super Committee. I have great respect for them. The headline says, Super Committee well short of a deal. Because this is not the way we run a country. And I refuse to be called addicted without the explanation that my mother would want me to give. I'm addicted to saving lives. I'm addicted to making sure that Social Security is not violently cut by the balanced budget amendment. Medicare being cut by nearly $750 billion if this resolution was to pass. Social Security almost $1.2 trillion. Veterans benefits $85 billion through 2021. And so my argument is to be able to analyze what we're doing here, my friends. The Constitution gives this House the power of the purse strings, but yet it will take 2/3 a vote in the middle of a crisis, a war, a disaster. The need to invest in our young people. Numbers that Dr. Jeffrey Sachs said that we need a legitimate apprentice program that leads young people from college or training into a job. Having jobs invest into America. Would you understand that we have the lowest number of white males going to college, the lowest number of African Americans going to college, the lowest number of Latinos? Expired. Can I get 15?